Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm going to get started tonight. I'm Linda Marston Reed. I'm the Executive Director of Arts Mid-Hudson, and I would like to let everybody know that tonight's event is being recorded, and that is so we can share it with even more people after tonight is over. It's also right now live on Facebook, so we're trying to get the word, the good poetry word out. So tonight is Leading with Artivism, We Grow, and it's a monthly interview series created and curated by Poet Gold in collaboration with Arts Mid-Hudson. All of us at Arts Mid-Hudson are absolutely thrilled and honored to be able to collaborate with Poet Gold on this series, which will be exploring over the coming months all of the artivists that really make a difference in our community. And I'm really very pleased that we have a nice turnout tonight. And I'd like to give you a little bit of information about each of our presenters. Bettina Poet Gold Wilkerson is a well-known poet, author, performer, songwriter, community artivist, and a speaker who pushes the boundaries of poetry and the spoken word. Poet Gold was appointed and served as the 2017 and 2018 Dutchess County Poet Laureate, and is known as the founder of Poetry Fest, getting ready to celebrate its 4th year this year in Poughkeepsie, coming up on April 24th. Poet Gold has received many honors and awards, including the Dutchess County Executive's Artivist Award. Joy Kelly is an actor, director, and storyteller. She has directed for Theater Works USA, as well as taught and directed at City College in New York City. She directed 2 pieces, Mints and Broken, as part of the United Solo Festival and at the Manhattan Repertory Theater, where Mints won Best One Act. She performed in the Bacchae at La Mama Theater, and most recently did storytelling in Central Park and at the Clearwater Festival in upstate New York. And without any further hesitation, I want to pass the mic over to Poet Gold and Joy Kelly.
Hello, I'm Poet Gold, and I first and foremost like to say thank you to the Kelly Miller Smith Institute for inviting me to be a part of this commemorative event celebrating the legacy of Pastor Kelly Miller Smith. Now for my offering, a poem entitled We Grow. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. Snatched from our motherland, brought to a strange land. 1619 it all began. The colonization of the African, the black man, our native tongue we would lose and no longer understand. Humans as a commodity, the white man descends into immorality. We be in the Americas now, but we be not free. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. Through chains, shackles, whips, the Middle Passage slave ships, we unearth our resilience. Stono Rebellion 1739 to Nat Turner fighting for our peace of mind. Seeds planted by the ancients, griots and leaders, pastors, preachers, and teachers trying their best to lead us so no one can beat us. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation, moving us from agriculture to the industrialization, and as a byproduct, attempt to save the soul of the nation. I declare, the Confederacy falls down, America takes ground, black freemen walk around the town, and the birth of a nation becomes renowned. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. 1920 in the Mississippi Bayou, a child is born who later set on a journey to fulfill his heart's song. Planting new roots in Tennessee, he felt a calling to stand up for the betterment of the we. Kelly Miller Smith. You may not know his name. Like Martin, Malcolm, Huey, he was doing the good work just the same. Breaking down walls in Nashville, he stood for change. Forwarding segregation to integration in education was his formation, and he never asked for fame. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. Now today, 21st century prison industrial complex, Black Americans are on the chopping block. And in the streets, Black and brown boys and girls plop and drop. But the first Black president brought us hope. Wish my daddy was alive to see, though he may have thought it was a joke. It was real. Obama made us feel like we are somebody and we can be somebody. Harriet Tubman might be going on a $20 bill, and Senator Kamala Harris is going to the White House from Capitol Hill. Yet we all need to be reminded that Black lives matter still. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. Where do we go from here? Where do we go? We grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Gold. That was amazing, absolutely amazing. Tonight we have questions that people have already sent in advance. And if you have a question that you would like to ask Poet Gold or Joy, you can put it in the chat box. And if you're not familiar with the chat box, if you pull your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little box that says chat. And if you click on that, it'll appear and you can type in questions. And again, we'll get to as many questions as we can tonight. So thank you for participating.
Great. So I'm Lilia Perez. I'm the Grants and Programs Manager for Arts Mid-Hudson. I'm going to be asking the questions that you all submitted and posing them to Gold and to Joy Smith. And Gold, I thought, this one wasn't on the list, but I thought you'll be able to answer it. Just could you give the audience a little bit of background about the piece that we just watched and how it came about?
Well, actually, it was a blessing, for me to engage upon the project. It actually came from my friend Joy. Her father was commemorating his life, his 100th birthday, and she invited me to write a piece for the foundation, the Kelly Miller Smith Foundation. And so to be honest with you, Joy and I have worked together before, but I really didn't know her complete story until this invitation and the impact her life journey has had on the desegregation of schools in Nashville, Tennessee, and her father's legacy and his story as well. And so when I was invited to do the piece, I did some research and wanted to really tell a full story, not only Pastor Smith's story, but the story of our journey as African Americans in this country, being taken from Africa, planted here in America. And it's a poem that spoke to not only our trials and tribulations, but also the resilience. And that's why I titled it, Where Do We Go From Here? We Grow, because we have shown to be a forgiving people and at the same time a hopeful people. And I feel that that's one of the messages that came out of my research of Pastor Smith. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and Joy, could you tell us a little bit about your father and where also, a little bit of your side of where this all came about, your collaboration with Gold?
Well, my father was a Baptist minister. He passed away back in 1984. He was very involved in the civil rights movement in the 50s and in the 60s. He was part of SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Council. And he was very instrumental in the sit-in demonstrations in Nashville. He worked with the students, and he worked with several people trying to deal with desegregation in Nashville and in other parts of the South. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. When I was 6, I integrated a school, and it was my parents' choice that I would integrate this school. They actually celebrated the 50th anniversary of this some years ago, and they had me come and talk, and they made a film of it, a documentary. There were 11 African-American children who integrated schools, who integrated the first grade. They had decided they would start with the first grade. It's the same year as the Little Rock kids were integrating Central High School in 1957. Now, I just told you my age. But I grew up, that was all just a part of what my life was, dealing with social justice, especially in the 50s and the 60s. I remember segregation. I remember white-only signs. I remember the way people were treated. And I also remember how the kinds of lessons that my father taught, it was, his big thing was nonviolence. He had a lot to do with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. John Lewis was part of it at the time. My father worked with King and with Jesse Jackson and several people like that. And that's basically what my life was as a child, growing up in that kind of atmosphere. So I grew up knowing that I was worth something, and I could try as hard as I can, and I will get somewhere with it. When I started the first grade, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just excited about going into the first grade. My parents didn't make a big deal out of it, although I found out way later, years later, they were very, very nervous about it, because it was a terrible time. It was a really terrible time for African Americans. The parents organized to bring the children to school, and it was, I've forgotten how many schools there were. I was the only one in my school, but there were a few other schools that were integrated at the same time. My father was very well respected in the 50s and the 60s. They named a bridge after him. And we decided when, if he was still alive, this past October, he would have been 100 years old. And my family and I decided that we should commemorate that, and we should talk about the things that he talked about, what his life was like. He was born in Mount Bayou, Mississippi, which is an all-Black town in Mississippi. He pastored a church in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And then after he married and had me, we moved to Nashville. I'm the oldest of 4 children. And he saw all the injustices that were going on. He grew up among it. And so he decided to be a part of it and to, push forward and get other people to also be a part of it. And we wanted people to know what he had done. And I guess that basically answers your question. That was a really long answer.
No, that answered my question, my question and my next question. So thank you.
Okay.
And well, going off of that, could you tell us a little bit about the Kelly Miller Smith Institute and then leading into how this collaboration happened with Poet Gold? Okay.
The Kelly Miller Smith Foundation, we decided to organize a foundation. I actually looked up what our mission was to be very accurate. The mission of the Kelly Miller Smith Foundation is to advance the effectiveness of social justice advocacy and advocates through education, preparation, and negotiation as inspired by the learnings and legacy of Kelly Miller Smith Sr. It's a relatively new foundation, and we're still in the process of figuring out exactly, specifically, what we are going to do. A lot of it's going to be centered in Nashville, Tennessee, in the South, where my father worked. Now, when we were planning the symposium, we wanted to talk about what happened in the past and what is happening now. And because I'm in the arts, I wanted, you know, artists in it. I mean, I have a niece, I have a few nieces who were very connected with music. And I said, well, why don't we have a poet? And I know just the poet, because I worked with Poet Gold in this wonderful camp, the Migrant Ministry Camp, where we do teach those kinds of values of what social justice is to children, which is really where my heart is. I love working with children. And that's how I met Poet. And we had a lot of conversations, and I'd heard some of her poetry, and I knew that she would be absolutely perfect for the symposium. And yes, you were, and you still are. It was fabulous.
Thank you so much. I know it was such a gift for me. I enjoy learning history and things about history that I don't know, and there's so much that I don't know. And so whenever I'm invited to grow in that aspect, I'm really appreciated. But I was particularly moved by the fact that we've spent so much time together, and I realized how much of your story I really didn't know. You know, you've shared stuff at dinner, you know, at camp, and you know, there's so much going on that sometimes as humans we're half listening, you know, and you know, and I recognized I was half listening. As I began to research, I was like, whoa! I was like, I kept reading and going, whoa, George, whoa! This is the story.
Well, that's the thing, though. When you grow up in a certain kind of way, that's just what your life is. And It's only as an adult I started to realize, yeah, it was. There were a lot of momentous things that happened within the course of my life, and the things. I mean, dealing with the social justice, especially in the 50s and the 60s, where it was really, really, really awful, and the way people reacted to us.
Let me ask you a question. Do you feel that it shaped you know, your art present day in any way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel very, very attached to things that deal with social justice kinds of issues, especially as a storyteller, because I do tell some of my story as part of some of the programs that I present. As a storyteller, I talk about my experiences, and I connected with folk tales to get people to think about the way things used to be, the way things are, what has changed, what has not changed. And yes, it totally affects the kinds of things that I do. There was a point where I just decided I really want to do this kind of theater. I really want to tell these kinds of stories. I love multicultural because diversity is a big deal for me, because I grew up, I was often like the only African American in many, 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 many situations. Right. And so I'm very comfortable being around people who look different from me. But, you know, we might have the same kinds of interests, the same kind of rapport. And it's always just very interesting to me to meet different kinds of people. And that comes from my father. That really comes from my father, because he's always been like that as well.
There's a question in the chat. Lily, I'll just go ahead and ask it. It says, when you integrated the school, how did the teachers and staff treat you? Was there any friend making with your peers?
All right. That was, when I look back on it, it was different, because now as a teaching artist, I do go into the schools, and it's just a different thing. My first grade teacher was wonderful. She did what teachers aren't even allowed to do now. She would hug us every now and then and say, "Do you love me?" But the thing was, I never went to birthday parties. I had one play date with, there was a woman who came to my mother. My mother was picking me up from school, and asked if I could have a play date with her daughter, who was in the second grade. Oh, gracious. When I was in the first grade, the other thing about integrating the school, it wasn't busing. This school was actually closer to where I lived. I was in what they call a changing neighborhood. The closest all-black school was maybe about 3 or 4 blocks away, and the school that I went to was only a block away. And so my father would take me for the first month or so, and then I'd walk home. It was just a block away. But there was I'm going to tell the story. I'll tell the story.
Sure.
But she was I used to walk home with two girls who were in the second grade.
Okay.
And one of them, I tell this to the kids too. One of them had cat and had kittens, and being little girls, we wanted to see the cat and we wanted to have kittens and all. And she gave one kitten to the other girl. And I found out that this girl lived a few doors down from me. So I went to her house. And it was, I guess it was a duplex. It was a multiple family house. So the front door was open. So I went in, being 6 years old and not realizing I shouldn't have just gone in. I met her father about halfway up the stairs, and that's when he called me names. And he chased me out. I came home in tears. And my mother asked me what was wrong. And she said, that's what you get for walking into those people's house. But that was the first time I was called the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
There were other kids. There was a little boy who came to me once and said that he wasn't like all the other kids in my class, that he was nice. And he sang this little song that also included the N-word. This is all in the first grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were, I call them indignities, that happened to me all throughout school, because I was the only one or one of two or three in my class all the way up through high school. I couldn't join the Brownies when all the other girls in my class, when I was in the third grade, because basically I think it was because they didn't want a little black child in their house. They called my mother to the school because all the other girls in my class were all excited about it. So was I. And then they called my mother to the school and said that I couldn't join. There were things like that. There were things that really I wanted as a child that now seem kind of weird, but now as an adult. But there were things like that. But I also understood, because I integrated a school and because I knew that barriers could be broken, that I could push forward. I mean, the very next year there was the Girl Scout Brownie troop that was founded by a black mother and a white mother. And so the troop was completely integrated. But I mean, it was just little stuff.
Right.
Now I would consider it little stuff. When I was a kid, it was like, yeah, there were things that I absolutely resented because they felt that I shouldn't do it because nobody black had done this before. There were things like at a carnival, there were some girls in front of us in line for something, and the two girls were very nervous because they really believed that we were not really human. They thought we might have tails. They were absolutely afraid.
Yeah.
And I remember standing there looking at them really, really, really curiously, what is going on here. But those kinds of things, especially in the 50s and the 60s, people really, and there are people today who believe those kinds of things as well. But I pushed through, and I was a very good girl. I was what you call a goody two-shoes, I guess. I made really good grades. But when I was in high school, we had a big walkout. All the black students walked out because the band marched behind the Confederate flag. And so we decided that we were going to create our own flag and walk in front of the football stands. We actually asked the principal if it was okay. But then somebody called my father and said my sister and I were leading a flag burning demonstration, which we weren't. We were just marching with the flag. And there were things like that happened throughout, all kinds of stuff that I had to deal with. I hated my high school. I was so glad to get out. Junior high school, there was a point where I realized I'm going to have to deal with this because I'm going all the way through school. I'm going to have to deal with people who are prejudiced against me just because of the way I look. And so I decided when I was in junior high school that if I laugh at them, that they'll stop. And it worked.
So that was your coping mechanism.
Exactly. It absolutely worked because they're wanting me to like get all mad and stuff. But because of my background with nonviolence, with the way my father was and my mother, fighting was just not something that I thought about. So I laughed, and that was totally like took the other kids aback. What's going on? But that was how I dealt with it.
When you speak about nonviolence, because I'm a proponent of nonviolence, but what one doesn't understand all the time is that nonviolence is, for the other system, considered a violent action.
Absolutely. Even today.
Right.
Even today. Yes, absolutely, because it goes against what people have already gotten buried into their heads. I mean, racism is insidious in this country, and it's going to take a long time, maybe never, that doesn't happen, because of the mindset, we've been told and what we see. It's constant. And then I was there in the 60s when we had the afros and the Black is Beautiful stuff and Black Power and all that stuff. That was also part of the way it was a rebellion, but it was considered, I mean, it was such an affront to people.
But it was also self-empowering, you know.
Absolutely.
This is our power. There's another question about the fabric behind you. It says, does the fabric behind you tell a story? And then she compliments, it's exquisite.
I just love this fabric. No, it doesn't really tell a story. It's mud cloth. I like the animals on it. I think I got it at the African festival that used to be at Boys and Girls High in Brooklyn a while ago. And I used to always just put it up on my wall. And now, because I'm doing all these Zoom presentations, I decided to use it behind me. But thank you very much. I love this fabric. Gorgeous.
Lillian?
Yeah, so thank you. So getting back to the piece we watched the beginning, Gold, could you tell us a little bit about your message behind the piece, and what your intention is and how you hope it's heard?
It's twofold. One, it's about resilience. It's, a lot of my work has hope built into it. In the story, but it's about resilience. After every stanza, I end it with the question of where do we go from here? Because that's often the thing that people ponder, like, where do we go from here? But we grow. We've grown through every situation. We may not have gotten everything we wanted out of the transition, but we've gotten something, and we grow through it. And so, and that's the message, that it's a story that's still unfolding. A lot of work still needs to be done, but as long as we are willing to face that truth, the majority, I'm going to say, there's going to be splinters, I think, on both sides of the aisle that deal with things differently. But I think the majority of people, if we're willing to do the work, we will grow. And we have a responsibility to each other as human beings to do the work. And to confront the work that needs to be done so that we can grow through it. I have a good friend that says, grow through what you go through. And we'll get there.
Thank you, Cole. And Joy, so, back to the questions that we got from our audience, another question we had was, what do you think some of the biggest challenges facing the Black community are today? And, it's kind of another question kind of runs into this. It asks, what social justice work you're currently engaged in. So what are kind of the things that you're focused on right now?
A lot of it is working with kids, doing my storytelling, putting the word out in that kind of a way, because a lot of us still have this thing in our heads about about the way people are. Having grown up with so many with being the different one, with different people, it made me really appreciate diversity, and it also made me understand that people are people. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't even matter what country you come from, what language you speak. We all want the same kinds of things. We really, really do. We are not that different inside in our hearts. And a lot of people don't want to accept that. They want certain people to be better by virtue of their birth. And that's the kind of thing that I look at, especially when I choose stories to tell. And mostly when I talk to children. I've done some public speaking about my own experiences as well. And being a part of this foundation that my siblings and my nieces and nephews, my family are organizing at this point. But that's really what I'm looking at. It's really one-on-one or with small groups of people. I'm not trying to do anything really, really gigantic and big, because you can get to some people one person at a time. You can get a message across one person at a time, or 20 people at a time. I think that is as valuable, because as long as you make people think about what they're saying, think about what their beliefs are. And that's where my storytelling comes into play. So that's basically what I'm doing now. The difficult things that the social justice, a lot of the stuff, because I was looking at, the signs for the March on Washington, a lot of that stuff was never really enforced. And a lot of it is because people still have this weird idea about who people of color are. And I have this notion that most people who are very prejudiced against groups of people, they're not looking at individuals. They're looking at a faceless mass of people. Because I've had people say to me, we're trying to make our neighborhood better. We mean white, of course. And I'm thinking, well, why are they telling me this? Because I'm different from the other people. I mean, people have this idea, this fantasy about who people are. And I think that's a big, big problem, because it makes people it makes people prejudiced. It makes them decide not to choose you for employment. It makes them to think that if you get something, it's only because you're Black. And I think people need to look at human beings as human beings, because that's really, really what we are.
Yeah. Joy, I want to. I'm glad you shared that. When I was younger in prep school, there was an exchange program, a student exchange program, and there was a gal who came from, I forgot, I think it was Germany or someplace, to the United States, and she was staying with a family whose student attended the school I was in, and I brought her to Harlem. And she said, oh, I can't tell my family I'm in Harlem. And she goes, and she, as we walked around in Harlem, she was, the people here are so nice. And I said, well, what did you anticipate the people to be like? And she said, well, the stories, once again, the stories that they tell where I come from is that, you're shooting each other, you're killing each other, and the white person should never come here because you're going to be murdered. And she said, but it's a very welcoming environment. We were kids, and so it was breaking down those stories by
exactly. I was an exchange student. I lived in the Netherlands for a year. It was being in the Netherlands also, though, that was the first time I didn't feel like I was being judged by the color of my skin. A lot of it is that people were bending over backwards because I'm an American, and they hear all the bad things about what's happening in America. Because I asked someone, what do you think of as a typical American? And they said a policeman. And they did have that image that in America, there's dead bodies lying in the street all the time, because that's what they get in the media. I mean, it's the same thing that we see now in the media. They don't focus on the peaceful demonstrations, which is what most of them are. They focus on the real violent parts that happen at the end, because I guess that's more, fantastic. That's more interesting, they think, for the public. But it gives a warped idea of what is really happening, what is really going on, what people really, really want.
Community.
Exactly, community.
And I think if we can, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but understand the fears that we have as individuals, and be willing to have the courage to work through it, to have the courage to say, I'm scared. Even if you meet someone that you're not familiar with, to be able to say, I've heard these stories about you in a group, and I'm finding out that maybe this is it's not the same thing, and to be able to work through that process, and we get somewhere. Joy, I want to thank you. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. One, for inviting me to be a part of your family's legacy. It was I had no idea, to be among some of the civil rights dignitaries that were there. Ambassador Andrew Young, Dr. Michael Dyson. I mean, I just want to thank you. I truly mean that. And thank you for showing up today to share your story. Artivism. I know we have a guest coming up next month. I think it's Gwen Laster. You want to talk a little bit about Gwen? And Joy, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you both so much for that incredible conversation. Those are all my questions. You covered them all even before I asked them sometimes. But yeah, I'll just quickly plug for next month. We have Gwen Laster will be our March Artivist. And she is releasing an album called Blue Lotus with New Muse Quartet. And she actually received an individual artist commission from us a couple of years ago for a piece called Black Lives Matter Suite. And that is contained within the Blue Lotus album that's being released, I think within the coming days. So just look out on our social media. We're going to be sharing clips of the album. We're going to be doing she's going to do an Instagram takeover for Arts Mid-Hudson, and then we're going to have another event like this towards the end of the month. So just look out for all of that in your email from Arts Mid-Hudson. Gold, thank you so much for bringing this series to us. This is just a joy. It's a joy to have met Joy, so thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Love you guys. Thank you so much for being present and for contributing your questions. Thank you, Linda. Melissa, thank you for your work.
Thank you very much for your presentation tonight. It was wonderful. It was a good conversation, and we already looking forward to next month. So, and I want to thank Lilia and Melissa for being our technical experts and whizzes behind the scenes to keep things going. That's a big plus that we have these talented women on our staff. So thank you.
It wouldn't happen without you guys.
That's right.
Virtual hugs, guys.
Oh, yes.
Thank you all for being here.